Good evening, class. We are going to jump into chapter 9 on our leadership um, journey as we move through the text that we're currently using. And before we get into, and chapter 9 talks about men and women and leadership roles and diversity and some of those aspects. But before we get into that, I want to spend just a couple of quick minutes talking about chapter 8 and what we learned. And it was focused on team and shared leadership. And they spend just a few minutes talking about the difference between group and mostly group. You're talking about clubs, fraternities, that kind of thing, and comparing it to teams. And with teams, you typically think of work teams, of athletic teams, those types. And one of the things that when you're trying to develop a team, and if you're a leader trying to develop a team, and it doesn't matter whether it's a short run team, for a short run project or a specific project that you have to pull individuals together for, or it's a long run team where you're developing an apartment or a functional area. But there are just certain basics that most leaders find um, that they tend to have not so much management issues with, but they are basics of developing these teams that they need to focus on. And those basics, as you can just probably guess from even before we started chapter 8, it's to avoid out-group relationships, develop a team with shared values, goals, and visions. And it's a paradox of independence or interdependence and versus individuality. And a lot of these basics we'd covered in some of the earlier chapters, especially the out group, especially leaders with shared values. And there's always a lot of these will come up with a paradox of something. And in chapter 8, it was talking about the paradox of interdependence and versus individuality. And that's especially significant when you're developing a team. And they introduced a phrase that I personally hadn't heard of before, but when they talk about team illness, and you focus on, and I've had a lot of teams in the past that you have to be really careful with, because you can see they start moving toward group think, where they're all have the same shared vision and goals, but they don't particularly like input from individuals, either within the team or outside the team, even, or even from the leaders of a team, that is counterproductive, counterintuitive, counter to their way of thinking. So that's you want to avoid that group think, and it can be extremely detrimental, especially if you're working on a grant or a government contract or a short-term project. You want as much diversity and as many different ideas as possible. And the second piece of it that when they talk about team illness, and this is one that I've encountered unfortunately on multiple occasions, and it's the free rider and the social loafing, and those individuals, you need to nip that in the bud the minute you see it happening, because not only does it reduce the productivity of the team, but it creates a somewhat defensive attitude within the team, especially those team members that are trying to pull together and trying to make sure that the team or the project it meets its goals in a timely manner. So again, both groupthink and team riding and free riding and social loafing, they're issues in developing a team concept, and they're just things that you really have to focus on when you're developing these teams. And then the 5 stages of team development, and I'm not too sure that I agree with that. The 5 stages, to me, they stages kind of blur, and you're a lot of times on a team you find yourself backtracking and moving forward, maybe jumping a stage and then back and forth. So but the authors think again academics, and so they think that these are extremely important, and to a lot of individuals they are. It's just sometimes depending on the time frame that you have, and again it goes back to the effectiveness of leadership. It's the leader, it's the followers, and it's the context. So the context and the situation and the timeline you have is going to determine how important following these stages of team development. And the stages were forming and storming and norming and performing. And then to me, the last one in the text, didn't get into it, very much. And that's kind of the adjournment piece of it. And I've always felt, especially if it's a short-term project or working on a grant or a government contract, something with a fairly short timeline, and you're really in there, cranking and churning, trying to get it out the door in a timely manner. I think you need to kind of group together as soon as the project's done, and don't just wipe your hands and say, well, that's it. Everybody go back to their, day-to-day job. But you need to kind of, what are the lessons learned, and, what problems did we solve, and was there a more efficient way to do it? So I think the adjournment piece is really important. And even though they didn't spend a lot of time on it in the text. And then lastly, they talk about the pros and cons of virtual teams. And prior to probably 2019, I guess. COVID started in 2019. It hit the ground running in 2020 in that first quarter of 2020. So prior to like late 2019, Q4 of 2019, Q1 of 2020, a lot of individuals, unless they were involved in global type firms or nationwide type firms, might not have had a lot of experience with virtual teams. So fortunately I had. So when the pandemic hit and companies sent everybody home, it was kind of an eye-opener, and to a lot of people that hadn't dealt with it. To me, it was just, I don't know, I was used to it. Economic Research Service, Aetna, Health Net, or Centene, they call themselves now, worked at United. So it was something I was used to, and I didn't have that much of a difficulty with it because I was used to managing and leading teams in kind of a virtual environment. But a lot of people struggle with it, especially where they struggle was when they had to bring new team members on, and it was trying to mentor and motivate and trying to bring them into that team concept that some leaders really struggle with it. And I think some leaders continue to struggle with it because you still have a lot of remote work from home, whatever terminology you want to use, followers, associates, again, goes back to the nomenclature that you're most comfortable with. But I think that makes a real difference, and I think it's a real sticking point for some leaders when they're trying to manage virtual teams. And with that, we're going to jump into chapter 9, the crux of it, and they talk about men and women leadership roles. And the authors, even though there's some caveats in the text, they tend to be focusing on men versus women and those type roles. To me, it's not just men, women. It's across the whole spectrum, and we'll kind of get into some of it as we kind of go down through it. But they talk about in the first of the text, they say diversity is a fact of life, and the two facts are what the really challenges with diversity is. Challenges faced by women who attempt to lead in work settings where control/power has been centered in others. And, when they talk about others, they're talking about males. And then secondly, it's challenges pertaining to inclusiveness and leaders who attempt to lead in a diverse environment. And I think we all understand those two concepts because we've probably all been in those two types of concepts one way or another. And to me, we just, I kind of step back and I look at things somewhat a little differently than the authors do, because, sometimes it is extremely difficult to develop a team. And some teams are more difficult to develop than others when it comes to diversity and when it comes to, inclusion. And in 2020, 2020, 2021, 2022, and just still moving along, the issues with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And with some teams, it is just extremely difficult, or at least I've experienced it to be extremely difficult to develop teams that have the level of diversity and equity and inclusion that leaders in the country think we ought to have. And so, and I think about what I've experienced in the past, and with HealthNet, and at least when I was with Aetna and HealthNet, it was mostly analytical type individuals, analysts, economists, statisticians, epidemiologists, and the majority of them, it was really difficult to have a diverse team, because a lot of those individuals, not only analysts I have, but you think about the IT shops in most companies, a lot of those individuals are from the Pacific Rim, near and far east, and it's really difficult because the expertise and the experience you need on those teams, it's really math oriented. If you're a programmer, computer science, statistician, focused on mathematics, even economists coming out of school, they have a very good understanding of mathematical concepts and the ability to work through the numbers and make the numbers make sense. And sometimes, just by the mindset of those types of individuals, it is tough to develop a team that has the diversity that maybe HR would like to see, or maybe the CEO would like to see. And the secondarily to that is Blue Cross Blue Shield and at United. And United had more analytical piece, but at Blue Cross Blue Shield, it was I needed a lot of clinical support. And clinical support meant nursing. And nurses, all of the nurses I had, and all of the nurses were female, female Caucasian. And it was, I couldn't get to the DEI level that everybody wanted, because you can't make people apply for jobs. And when you would post a position, all of the individuals applying for those positions fell into that homogeneous population. And that sat down and had several discussions with HR, and it just, you couldn't get past the homogeneity of the talent pool that applied to those positions. And especially in Buffalo, or let's just think of some of the northern tier. So when I worked at United, it was, the headquarters were in Minneapolis, or just, west of Minneapolis a little. Blue Cross Blue Shield, it's in Buffalo. And a lot of individuals that applied for those positions, it was extremely difficult to get, the diversity you need, because they didn't have either the mathematical skill set or the clinical skill set that I had to have. And secondarily, it was individuals that didn't like the weather in Buffalo, and they thought the social life in Buffalo was somewhat lacking. So just trying to develop those types of diversified teams, it was really difficult in that Buffalo market. And it was difficult for me because of the type of teams that I have and the type of skill sets that I needed. If I looked around, Blue Cross Blue Shield, if it was a medical management, they were faced with pretty much the same issues I had when it came to hiring nurses. They were pretty much all, female Caucasian. I think, there was one or two male nurses in the group, but just, no diversity there, just a homogeneous population. Now, if I looked at network management or operations or some of those, it was a different skill set that they needed, and it was easier for them to, I don't want to say meet diversity quotas, but it was easier for them to have a more diverse team or a more diverse population to work those teams. So when we talk about diversity, you're talking about ethnicities, you're talking about races, you're talking about genders. And they talk in the text about the glass ceiling and the glass cliff, and we'll get into that a little in maybe the second segment that we go through in this chapter. But kind of like to tie this chapter up before we go to the second segment with just a statistic that they throw out in the text. And as of May of 2018, there were only 24 of the Fortune 500 firms that had CEOs that were women. And they, give the example of 5%. Move forward into 2023. And if you look at, the Fortune 500, firms, I'm guessing that maybe, about 10, maybe 15% of the total CEOs are female. But I haven't had a chance to get out and scratch through Google and find those numbers. But my guess is it's increased some, but probably hasn't increased a whole lot. And that's where I'm going to kind of wrap that up at this point. And when I come back with our second segment, we're going to talk about challenges for women who attempt to lead. Talk to everybody in a few minutes.